Hi, everyone. My name is Dana Connors. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Maine Take, a program brought to you twice a month by the Maine State Chamber of Commerce, and I am pleased to be your host. This week, as in every week that we perform this program, we try to bring you timely information about some of the people, maybe it's the projects that have been undertaken or the policies that need to be discussed. Whatever it is, we try to bring to you that information that matters, because it matters to your lives and to your livelihood. And that is our purpose. Today's show is about entities. One is a community. The other is an important economic part of our economy. Both face challenges, but both are doing and have done something about it. On this portion of the show, we're going to be speaking with three guests who played a very critical role on behalf of the organizations that they represented, their efforts in turning the despair of a community facing an economic disaster into a story of economic success and promise. Let me introduce them to you. From our Katahdin, Steve Sandler, who is the director of the mill site development. We also have Mike Doenges, from Homegrown Solutions. They're the ones who had the economic strategy and sense with a focus on siting and permitting, particularly around renewable and alternative energy facilities, which proved to be very advantageous to the project that we'll be discussing today. We also have with us Ashley Sturm, who is in marketing and is part of the Nautilus data technology, the company that has that water cooling technology, and they're part of the construction and operation of what we're going to be describing and discussing, the data center. So to all three of you, I give you my welcome and appreciation for being on the show today.
Glad to be here.
Let me begin going back in history, although I promise to be quick, because when I tell you what date I'm starting, this show could last a long time. We're going to go back to Millinocket in 1902, because that's when the community saw the promise of the future in Great Northern locating a paper mill in the community. And for a century, that's right, 100+ years, they were there. They were the economic, if you will, the economic center of activity, not just for that community, but frankly, for the region. With it came generations of economic opportunity, family after family. The economy was good, jobs were there, everything was going well. But all that changed in 2008 when the plant closed. And with it came the hope for the future as well. So Steve, share with us in a couple of minutes what it was like to be a part of that community at that time when there was more despair than there was anything else.
Yeah, 2014 was really the bellwether where the smokestack from the steam plant came down. It was the iconic landmark of the town. Mill workers would, when they weren't working in the mill, would look at that stack, and by what was being emitted from it, they could tell what the mill was operating at or when it was going on. So it was just, when that was removed, even though the mill had been closed as 2008, that really marked that paper making in Millinocket was over. So it was really, it was really a gut punch. In 2014 when that occurred.
But I got to tell you, to the credit of all of you in the region of Millinocket, who never gave up hope, who said, you know what, paper didn't make this community made paper. And as a result of it, you created what we now know as our Katahdin, a volunteer organization, a nonprofit organization, who said, we can do this, we'll market it, we'll make the best of it. And frankly, I think it was 2018, I'll let you correct me on that you acquired the property from Kate Street, and for $1, It was 1,400 acres, as I recall, and you immediately went out and secured from various federal sources like $8 million to upgrade the infrastructure. That had to be a proud moment.
Yeah, just to back up a hair, Katahdin was formed at that low point of 2014, just to get some positivity going in the community. And so it was basically set up as an online platform to raise money to help community leaders to follow through with some just turnaround projects. And it started with decorating the bandstand downtown for Christmas time. And then, so it was just a community effort at that level until talking with some economic development opportunities, went to the current owners of the mill at the time and said, would you lease some land? And they said, we'll do one better. We'll sell you to it for $1, but you got to take all the liabilities as well. So a leap of faith was done, and purchased a 1,400 acre mill site. And a little sleepy community nonprofit turned into the economic redevelopment engine of the region. And
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, and just to add, so took about a couple years of getting IRS tax liens, site secured, and raising money for a capital investment into the site. And as you mentioned, we have about an $8 million project going into expand and refurbish the critical infrastructure, including roads, power, sewer, and water to the site.
Well, it was a risk, as you described, but the reward is pretty obvious, and that's what I want to turn our attention to right now. We have Ashley and Mike with us. As I mentioned, Mike represents Homegrown Solutions, who really found that connection, found the asset that apparently they were looking for, and the people who were welcoming them. And as they say, they reached out to Nautilus Data Technologies and had a joint venture. And I'm going to ask Mike to kick it off by talking a bit about that coming together, how that happened, and what did you see that was instrumental in your location in Millinocket?
Sure. Thanks, Dana. So, it's really interesting. The two of my business partners now, Lee Kahn and Lindsay Johnson, were familiar with the area, particularly because of Lee. Lee had been up to Millinocket several times for unrelated things for business and saw this site and learned about Katahdin and saw the community and met Steve and the team at the Katahdin group. And they were looking at placing other green technologies at the time. And one day, Lee and Lindsay called me and said, hey, we want you to come on up to Millinocket, take a look at this community, meet these people, and see if you can think of anything that would be beneficial to bring to the area. So in the process, through the conversations and learning about the history and what everybody had tried to do, we looked at the assets that were available, right? The human resources, the people that had worked at the mill prior, whether it be in maintenance or security or in operations or whatever that happens to be. We looked at the land assets and all the space that's available. And there's another asset that luckily Maine and the universities have put together that some of you may know as the 3-ring binder, which is a set of technology assets, which is fiber, right? And that fiber, along with from now managed by First Light, but also some fiber from Consolidated, runs right by the old paper mill site. Not only right by, but basically right up to the front door of the site, and gives us the opportunity, when you look at those things and you start to combine them, it really opens your eyes up to the fact that this would be perfect for a data center, right? You've got great connectivity, redundant power, all of these amazing resources. And then where the Nautilus piece comes in is typically you cool a data center with air, right? It's air conditioning, and it's very inefficient and very a very low grade way of doing a high powered job, right? Is to take hot air and turn it into cold air, and then take the hot air and turn it into, refrigerant. And there's this whole process that's very energy and time consuming. But Nautilus, which I'm sure Ashley will dive into a little bit, takes the warm air, turns it into slightly warmer water and uses an asset that also Millinocket has right there at the site, which is all this cold water that the plant used to use to generate steam and energy. So there's all these things that the site was kind of perfect for. And when we saw that, we said, okay, we have to find a data center technology company that can utilize all these resources. And that's where Nautilus came into play.
Ashley,
Yeah.
tell us more.
Right. Yeah. So to jump off at Mike's point, you know, I have worked in the co-location data center industry for a number of years now, and I've been with Nautilus now almost half a year. And when I heard the water cooling technology that they had developed, that in and of itself was a very, very big deal. To be able to find a way to cool down a data center, and I'll just geek out a little, just a minute here, to be able to cool down a data center without using water, and to do it more efficiently than data centers can do it with their standard processes right now is a really big deal. All that being said, that's not even the drive that runs Nautilus. You know, you'll hear Jim and Rob talk about it, but we're here to support high performance compute, which basically means you hear the words like artificial intelligence and machine learning, and it all sounds very complex to those of us who are not engineers. But those are the really highest running systems. They're really, really hard to put in a normal data center right now. The infrastructure, the envelope, is not necessarily ready to handle that yet. Our data center, because of the way we're cooling, can support the highest performance compute with extremely low environmental footprint, the lowest environmental footprint, enabling the greatest social gain. And that's what drives us, is when you open up the capability for those high compute platforms, those systems help you discover the leaps and the bounds that you can make when it comes to sustainable and improvement. So this facility, when our team saw it, already having, you know, the water intake and distribution systems, and it being, you know, going downhill, so we don't even have to use pumps, right? We will be able to create the greenest data center in the world. It'll run on 100% hydroelectric power. It'll use our water cooling technology. And in the data center industry, they gauge it by PUE, so power usage effectiveness. It will be the lowest PUE that this industry has seen. So the site itself, in that regard, was perfect.
It sounds like you have just created the greenest type of data center there probably is in the country.
We believe it will globally beat out all of our competitors when it's done.
That's interesting. But it also sounds to me like this is not a competitor to others that may exist in our state, which is sometimes how it's viewed. It sounds to me like, because of the capacity and because of the room available, that even if you have a data center in the state or you operate a data center, that it's more complementary than it is competitive.
Well, I'll tell you this, there is no lack of need for data center capacity right now. When the world shut down during COVID, I think that's probably when data centers got the most visibility, because of exactly what we're doing right now. Everybody got on Zoom, everyone got on a computer, and while the rest of the world was trying to figure it out, data centers exploded. So yes, you're right. And there's not a situation that we can foresee in the future, especially with more complex technologies coming online, that there will not be a need for data center capacity.
Interesting. Wow, that is impressive. So it all kind of came together in June of this year when the community, the industries that we've just talked with, and the community got together in an air of celebration, which they truly deserved, to make the announcement that here is a $300 million data center. And by 2022, we are going to have 84,000 square feet of data space. It's the first development in 13 years since the plant closed, very significant. On the very site, as I recall, where the last remaining building was, which was the administrative building in the former Great Northern site. It all seemed so magical. It's like a plan that came together, and it came together so well. But I think the other part of that, it seems to me that we're talking of 13 acres out of 1,400 acres. It's got to be an incredible catalyst for others to look at and say, oh my Lord, this is such an opportunity, whether you're in the forest industry or whatever the company may be. It just seems to be a remarkable opportunity, a promise, if you will, for the hard times that the people of Millinocket put up with from 2008 until, frankly, in the span of time, only 13 years later. That's pretty remarkable.
It is. It's a good cookout.
Yeah. Well, anybody else have anything they'd like to add?
A lot of the efforts in the process of getting Nautilus and a data center put in the Millinocket area was to go out and develop a market, right? Data centers typically are near their customers. Millinocket, Maine isn't necessarily close to a majority of these customers. So what we did is we spent a lot of time going throughout the state of Maine, talking to Maine companies and Maine municipalities about becoming customers of this data center in the future. Got a great amount of feedback, and the Maine Chamber was a big part of that process. So I think that that was a big catalyst in being able to execute and bring Nautilus to the forefront into Millinocket. So
I can't thank you enough. I can also thank Kay Rand, a friend, at one time an associate, but she went on to bigger and higher things, as they say. But to also thank all of you, because your story today, and indeed it is a story, is a very inspiring one, a very encouraging one, and a lot of credit go out to a lot of people for you and both Homegrown Solutions, but also Nautilus, for recognize the potential was there. For Steve, you and the community and all that refused to give up hope, stood by what you believed in, your area, your region, and did something about it. It's a wonderful story with a wonderful ending, and I thank you all for sharing it. I'm pleased at this time to be able to welcome a good friend of the State Chamber, one who has worked with us on a number of occasions. He's also well known in the hospitality industry because he's had a distinguished career there and currently operates as government director or director of government affairs. Greg, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. And I've got a couple issues I'm dying to ask you about. So here goes.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. I think we're all aware that the America's Rescue Protection Act provided funds that was intended to help the restaurant industry during the pandemic. We've seen incredible examples around our state as to how the restaurant industry has had to grapple with the worker shortage that they had before the pandemic, made worse by the pandemic. And we've seen that expressed in less hours, less capacity, but in the course of it all, they've really struggled. So ARPA came up with this initiative called the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. They dedicated money. It was for the whole country, but it appears from all that I've read, and I'm going to ask you to speak to it, that they underestimated the need. And now there's time to go back because so many restaurants, which are so important to Maine's economy, is hurting. And so is that true? And tell me more about it.
Oh, it's absolutely true, Dana. And I think, you did a little bit of a history lesson there as to how things have progressed this summer, but I think you need to go back because, we're over 18 months into this, and it's been a trying time. And a lot of the funds that were given through PPP and meant to be given through the RRF were really funds that people needed for past due items. Like, obviously, we have issues with having to borrow funds, having to be closed and not being able to generate any income for periods of time back in 2020. So a lot of people still haven't recovered from that. They still owe money. They borrowed money to be able to get through. And then you get to a point where the restrictions are eased last year, but it wasn't quite exactly what it should be, which digs the hole a little bit deeper. And then you move to this year, where you just described it aptly about the labor shortage and all of the things that have occurred. And, you know, a lot of my people have ended up having to close, not because they had to, but because they felt it was the appropriate thing for a period of time because of a COVID case. So lots of things have worked against us, which led us, to be needing to have additional funding. So when the ARPA funds were approved, they were approved at $28 billion, and there really was a need for much more than that.
So the problems haven't gone away. My understanding is there's a real effort to amend the original act to provide more money at the federal level.
That's correct. And just to give you an idea of, because everything we've talked about, we haven't talked about moving forward. And the National Restaurant Association just did a survey, and the results were that 6 in 10 adults changed their restaurant use due to the rise in the Delta variant. This is done in the last week of August. 19% of adults have stopped going out to restaurants. 9% have canceled existing plans to go out to a restaurant in recent weeks. 37% have ordered takeout or delivery instead of going out. And 19% have chosen to sit outside, which we know is ending here shortly and won't be available to us. So it makes the need all that much greater for additional funding. So there were a couple of bills out there at about $60 billion a piece. One of them was just a standalone, and the other one was a bill that was put in but would have taken money from the CARES Act and that was unspent to be able to fund it. It was primarily a Republican initiative. Neither one of them really got much traction. And there was an attempt to actually achieve this by unanimous consent when discussing some other legislation. There was one senator that objected, and as well, you know, that's all that it takes to stop it. So the most recent vehicle, and one that was recently supported this Monday, co-sponsored by Senator King, is Senate Bill 2675. And Senator Ben Cardin from Maryland is the one that actually put the bill in, and it asked for $48 billion, which is the difference between what was given out and what was approved, basically. And you have to also remember there was a couple of other things associated with this. Originally, there was a priority designation for women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, socioeconomic issues that would be related to your business. And about halfway through them awarding the grants, there was a lawsuit that stopped the whole process. So a bunch of people were told they were going to get money, never got money. And then there were all the people that didn't qualify for the priority that are sitting out there still, a lot of us in Maine, about $182 million in monies that were not put forth here in the state of Maine that were applied for through the RRF.
Boy, it sounds pretty critical when you put it in full context, and I can imagine what it'd be like, not to personalize it, for me to not go out to a restaurant on a Friday evening. It's a natural routine. But when you think of the impact on our economy and what restaurateurs have gone through in these past 18 months, I do hope we do everything that we can. And if there is anything that we can do in terms of supporting this, we'll be there with you in that respect. So.
Well, and our goal, actually, Dana, there is something now that you asked. Our goal is to get Senator Collins to also co-sponsor this. We've spoken to her office and to her directly. I spoke to a few people yesterday that actually spoke with her directly. It is a bipartisan bill. It is something that I think, most anybody can sign on to and feel good about it because the need is absolutely great and is not going to go away anytime soon. So if you happen to have a conversation with the lady senator, please bring it up.
I most certainly will, Greg. While I've got you, I also want to speak to another area that I think is to your credit, because it's very clear to me that the industry has some challenges. Hospitality as a sector has challenges, but you're not sitting back doing nothing. you're doing what you can to make a difference, and I commend you for that. It has to do, once again, with the worker supply. I've read just recently, today, as a matter of fact, where you have put forward through your foundation an effort to really look into the future, recognizing that the worker shortage isn't going to go away soon, but you're going to focus on skill, and you're going to try to encourage people to see the restaurant hospitality industry as a great career with a certain skill. And I think it's called the Dirigo Hospitality 2025. Speak to us about, both the idea, but also the need that I've tried to express, but probably not adequately.
Well, we basically, before we were merged as one entity, we had two education foundations. As we merged the two associations, we merged the foundations too. So they have a lot of history in providing educational opportunity. This particular plan, however, goes above that. If you remember, we had COVID training, like for lodging, and COVID training for restaurant. So, we're no stranger to education. Earlier in the year, we did something called the Great Maine Comeback, which was put together to attract people to apply for jobs within the hospitality industry. So this is really kind of a culmination of all those efforts. The whole time we were doing most of that, Steve Hewins, who is the director of the Education Foundation, was working to put a program together to really, raise the bar and raise the profile of the industry. It's a wonderful industry. It's a great industry to work in. There are opportunities to work part-time, certain days of the week. It's really a great fit for some people. And of course, there's all kinds of career opportunity associated with it too. So a lot of the plan really kind of creates career pathways, working with all the entities that exist, and not only working with them, but working to kind of bring them all together. The community college systems, the area technical centers, all of those kinds of entities that have been part of this, but aren't necessarily seamlessly connected. It's a big plan. I'm not, it's certainly something that is going to take some time. We did hire, again, hats off to Steve Hewins, but he's moving into a retirement phase. And we did bring in a gentleman named Derek Fassett to be the executive director of the foundation. So basically, what Steve did graciously is provide a roadmap to Derek to know where to go next. Some of this stuff is short term, and a lot of it is long term. I believe, that the 2025 basically tells you that, but there are components of it that will be happening through that time period. And we look forward to it because we need to do some different things. I mean, the pandemic hurt us more than it did any other industry because of our front-facing situation. And so a lot of people have reconsidered the fact that they were not working for a period of time, or reconsidered the fact of working with other people so closely. There are a lot of issues that need to be addressed, and this plan will work on those.
Yeah, I was struck with the fact that when I did read the article that has said that in hospitality in this past period of time during the pandemic, we've lost about 13,000 employees. I mean, that in itself gets your attention, not to mention how critical the restaurant industry is to the entire tourism sector, which brings to the state not only wonderful attention, but significance in terms of the economy, jobs, revenue, and all those things. So again, I said this a moment ago, I repeat it because it deserves being repeated, and that is, hats off to you guys, because the fact of the matter is, when you face challenges like this, it's easy to wring your hands and worry about it, but you all are doing something about it. And what you're doing will make a difference, whether it's the Dirigo Hospitality 2025 or federal dollars to try to help businesses through. They all matter, they're all important, and they all will help our entire economy. So Greg, as always, you're a great guest. I appreciate having you on, and it's good to see you again.
Thank you, Dana. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Take care. The takeaway for this week is an interesting one to think about. It's encouraging, it's inspiring, and it's all about meeting challenges. It's not about having challenges. We all have challenges. We're probably challenged more often than we want. It's not that we have challenges, it's what we do about it. And our guests today, whether it was a community or whether it was the hospitality industry of our state, a very important sector of our state, they are facing challenges, or they have faced challenges. And in both instances, they are doing something about it. Greg Dugal brought to our attention how severely hurt the restaurant industry has been during the pandemic. It started early and it still persists. It's reflected in hours reduced. It's reflected in capacity. It's a number of ways that the restaurant industry is trying to cope with this incredible challenge. Greg brought to our attention the fact that there is a federal fund that was well-meaning, that's helped a lot, but didn't go far enough. It was probably half the amount it should have been. And every effort is underway to try to replenish that, to help an industry that's so vital to probably all states, but clearly this state. The other thing he did was to recognize the worker shortage that we have in the state and to also acknowledge it's probably not going to get better soon, but they're doing something about it. They've created an initiative that brings their past experiences together, that recognizes above all else how important the employee is. But skills are important. It's a trade, it's a profession that has a lot of opportunities. And Dirigo Hospitality 2025 is a plan to enable them to get there. The other one was about a community that's familiar to all of us, Millinocket. It is a great story with a great ending. It was a community that depended on an industry that had been there for over a century. And then in 2008, it came crashing down in terms of it closed its doors. And with it came a loss of hope. With it came the realization that my parents and my grandparents found their living in this mill. And so wasn't I planning on it, but that hope was perished. But the people of Millinocket didn't stand idly by and say, well, that's fate, it's going to happen. We'll have to do something, but it may not be here. No, instead, they took fate in their own hands. They created a nonprofit, a volunteer organization. It was called Our Katahdin. They said, paper didn't make this community. The community made paper. And they built the energy and the attitude around, we can do this. And clearly time has proven them to be correct. They purchased the property, 1,400 acres. They bought it for $1. They found $8 million to put into infrastructure improvements. And they found a company so ideally suited. As a matter of fact, two companies that worked together that were so ideally suited. And even though it fought the traditional location, a data center usually is near the populated parts of a state, but not here. As a matter of fact, the resource was so rich, the opportunity was so great, and their visits with businesses throughout the state proved that this was the right place. And you know what? In June of this year, they all came together to celebrate because a data center, a $300 million investment, the first development in 13 years, was committed to be built in 2022. Amazing story. And it's just the beginning, because this was 13 acres of a 1,400 acre site. Yes, the town of Millinocket has a great future, and they're off to a great start. It is what they say, every great story has a great finish, and boy, this one certainly does. You know, I'm reminded of a show that I used to watch years ago with my two sons. It was called The A-Team. They faced some incredible obstacles during the course of that half hour every week, but at the end, the captain would always say, I love it when a plan comes together. Well, the people of Millinocket are probably saying that at this very time. But let me also remind you that, think about this, Great Northern provided paper whose purpose it was to store and convey information. We just celebrated technology, innovation, and a new way to store and convey information. Isn't that remarkable? 100 years plus after they started doing something similar, but in a very different way. Great story, great ending. And that's the takeaway for this week. As we say on every show, take care of yourself, but also take care of one another. We'll see you right back here in 2 weeks. Take care. Bye-bye.